Hello to everyone who is listening or watching. This is Meet and Grief, what's bringing you joy right now. When you're new to grief, being asked this question can be daunting. I think we all know that as grievers. Most of us are just trying to get through the day. But with time, moments start creeping back in, and eventually, many of us, not all, but we become intentional about looking for it so that we can feel some sense of balance. And so this conversation is for those who are wondering what joy and grief can look like while walking side by side, and for those who are perhaps searching for new ways to feel joy themselves. Can you please share with us your name and where in the world you're joining us from today?
Yeah. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Sara Andler Sisson, and I am joining you from Indianapolis, Indiana today.
Thank you, Sara, and thank you for being here with us. And if you're out there listening, then you know that the dinner party is a community of grievers, myself included. And so, Sara, as our guest today, can you please tell us who in your life brought you to TDP?
So I experienced the loss of my father after a brief battle with lung cancer in June of 2013, and then experienced the loss of my mother in May of 2017 after um, formally being diagnosed for 14 months with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and I was her primary caregiver during that time. And then my third loss was my grandmother in April of 2018. So those two, and it was my last living grandparent. So those two hit hard because it was my maternal grandma. So I had lost my mom, and then a few days short of a year later, lost my grandma, who was a connection, and she was like a best friend of mine. I actually got to work. She lived in independent living, and I got to work where she lived for 8 years. And
Wow.
we got to see each other all the time, build a really special bond. And actually, when she passed, she had moved into the long-term care facility that I was working at. So we were able to be together again, and she always said, "It's just better when we're together." And of course, that was the truth.
That is so beautiful. What an incredible for both of you to have had that experience.
It
That's
was
really
certainly,
incredible.
yeah, very a huge gift. And I'm the oldest, and I have a younger sister, and I got the family name. So I'm named
Mm.
Sarah Louise, and my first name is from my dad's side, and my middle name was my maternal grandmother's name. So we had a special bond for sure.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you for sharing with me. You brought up names. And so if you're comfortable sharing the names of I always like to bring names in, right? I think it's important. Because these are still our people. And I like for people to know my people's names. So if you're comfortable sharing their names, but also if there's just something that you'd like us to know about either each of them or one of them, but I'd love to hear about them.
Yeah. So you heard a bit about my grandma, Louise, also known by her initials LGN. She was definitely um, she was kind of feisty. She was quick-witted, and I would call her my banter buddy because she and I could just go back and forth with each other, and she was just always making me laugh. and really progressive in a lot of things. I've found out both as I got closer to her, but also since she's died. And then my mom, her name is Deborah, and actually locally, and I mean very much like within my own circle, she
Hmm.
became a social media icon because I would record her because I thought the stuff she did was funny, or I would like post things that she said and I put hashtag Deborah or hashtag things Deborah does. So
Hmm.
it's a little following for her. And she was a child and family play therapist, and definitely had a passion for people, making sure they felt heard, understood, and seen. Um, and then my dad, well, so my mom, we call Mumsles or Mumsy. And then my dad, his name's Craig, and we would call him Dadsy. So my dad was a wild man. He was a storyteller. Everybody will say, like, oh, your storytelling, like your jokes, your all of that like comes from your dad. I was definitely a daddy's girl, still am. And he was also a social worker. He worked with people with substance use that may be experiencing mental illness along with being unhoused. So lots of different vulnerabilities there. And he was just one of those people that like I would say both of my parents were very much like people in general fascinated them. And so obviously they were in the human services field. So every day it was like, oh my gosh, like I met this person today that has done this. And, they couldn't tell us like too much, but my dad was always like growing up, I would go to work with him some days. And like everybody from the CEO of the company down to the person who was out weed whacking the grass in the parking lot, like he knew their stories and I sat down with them and got to hear them.
Yeah.
So for me, that spirit of my parents and like seeing the incredible uniqueness and resilience in humanity is something that I
Mm.
really try to adopt and carry on. And I'm currently finally going to school for my MSW. So I say I'm trying to follow
Congratulations.
in the family biz now.
It is amazing what we absorb and soak in, right? And like how, especially I think for a lot of us who lost our parents, there's this like extension of their life into how we choose to walk through the world, right? And so much of it is like what we saw mirrored around us. And I think that's dope. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I Something I tell people is, when you're growing up, and you think about like turning into your parents, like everybody
Yeah.
has that happening where you like have, you say something and then you have to go look at yourself in the mirror and you're like, what is happening? It used to be like, oh God, and now it's like, oh, like, yeah, they're still with me.
Yeah. Yeah. The best parts are still there, right? I love that.
Yeah.
When we think about like people and just like how much community was kind of a part of then what you saw and what they instilled in you, a love for the community and service too. I'd love to hear about your experience as a host in our community. Um, and just like what made you decide that you wanted to be one? What has that experience been like for you? And just and being part of that community, right? And being in service with those at your table in a way.
Yeah, so I'm actually a very new host. I've
Mm.
only hosted two dinner table like meetings thus far, one being
Mm.
last week. Um thank you. I came to the dinner party end of 2019.
Mhm.
A childhood friend of mine that we followed each other on social media was a host in
Mm.
Indiana in Indianapolis, and she saw my post on social media about 1 year anniversary since losing my grandma, and she reached out to me and was like, "Hey, I just lost my dad. I've been doing this program and would love for you to join the table." And I was just like, what? Like, I started reading about the dinner party and I was like, this is like literally a griever's dream. Like, if
Yeah.
there's one good thing that you could find, like, this is literally like the diamond in the rough. Like, this
Mhm.
was everything that I had hoped and wished for in
Yeah.
2013 when I lost my dad.
Yeah.
Um, and so I was able to join as a dinner partier and had an amazing experience. And then, of course, as the world experienced, COVID happened and everything kind of stopped. We met a few times like out in public when the weather was nice. But it's just different. And, life kept on lifing. And this year, ever since then, I've always told people, like, oh, you have to check out the dinner party. You have to,
Yeah.
like, see this incredible, organization. Um, but this year, I've really felt like I was telling so many people, but then I was like, well, like, I'm telling them and I know like enough to have a table, like within,
Mhm.
like the people that I've come to encounter. And I really wanted that like in-person experience because it was
Mhm.
so impactful for me.
Yeah.
And so I finally was like, all right, you keep talking about it. Like, you can't keep sending people to something and like you're not being part of the solution.
Mhm.
And so I went and I signed up and I had donated previously and I attended the thank you event
Mhm.
that you all did and got to talk with Sophia,
Mhm.
and she was like, "You should do it. You should do it." And so then I was like, "Okay." So signed up and then, started telling people. We had our first group and had our second one. I have people in there that I know and people that I haven't
Mhm.
met. But it's been just incredible. I'm always like, oh, like, I wish we could do this more. It's so hard to
Yeah.
find time to do
Yeah.
that, but like the two times we've gotten together, I'm like, okay, I hope we have enough to talk about. And then I'm like looking down at the clock and I'm like, oh, we got to wrap things up. Like,
Yeah.
so, it definitely, it's just like you find someone that understands you in a way. Well, okay, so our group, we call each other Holemates because
Mhm.
this comes from Brene Brown was talking about the difference between empathy and sympathy. And
Mhm.
sympathy like looks at you while you're down in the hole and is like, you good down there? Like, throws stuff in and runs away.
Mhm.
And empathy like puts the ladder down, goes and gets in the hole with you and,
Mm,
just like holds that space and is there with you. And
yeah.
so one of our group mates, when we talked about that, it was like, let's, make that our name. So we're the whole mates and, just holding that space to not be okay, to say like, this random thing happened, but it reminded me of this and my parents and like it just really sucked. It was really hard. Or like this had me cracking up because of this, that, and the other. There's
Yeah.
just so many different things that we're able to relate to because our whole world has changed. And I'm just
Mhm.
happy, it's such an honor to have people join, um, and be able to hold that space for each other.
Yeah. I love that. I love Holemates. And that really is such the huge difference, right, between sympathy and
Mhm.
empathy. It's like you either get in the hole or you wave to those who are in it from someplace else.
Yeah.
And I like that you guys have brought that into your table. Um, I also loved what you said about like you sometimes are worried that you're not going to have a lot to talk about. And then you're like, oh shit, we actually need to wrap this up. Because I think that's one of the things that we hear from a lot of people when they're first thinking about being a host is like, I don't think I can hold like facilitate a conversation or I don't have enough things to talk about. And I'm always like, believe me, you won't need to. Like, this is a group of people, many for whom this is the first time that they've encountered something like this, right? And are wanting to emote and to talk and to answer questions and to talk about their people. And a lot of times it's hard to wrap up. It's not that you're ever at a loss of now, what are we going to talk about now? And I think that you will find like a lot of us who are hosts who have been doing it for a long time is, and eventually the conversations move from grief, right? And it's like we're talking about our pets and our jobs and our families and life that keeps life in. And it just becomes this really wonderful group. So just happy to hear about it.
Yeah.
As we're talking about this new thing that you're doing in your life, hosting, and this new program that you're starting at within school, I'd also like to talk about like new ways that you're being intentional about grief. Because I think, as we mentioned, a lot of people who are watching this are going to be like, well, I just lost someone and I'm not at that yet. And this conversation isn't to force people to find grief in the beginning, to find joy in the beginning, right? I think what is beautiful about this conversation and talking to so many grievers is that some are brand new and some are a little further out. And so your how you access or approach is different depending on where you are. So based on where you are on your grief journey, what kind of ways are you creating or engaging with joy? Like how has that shifted over the years?
Yeah, so definitely, it's very tough when you first experience that world changing loss. I think, the best that you can do is just to like get up, like open your eyes every day, not even get out of bed all the time. Because there certainly were times where it was just like my little bit of joy is staying in the warmth of this bed. Um, and I think as time has gone on, for me, I really try to like find ways to like lean into things that remind me of my people that I've lost, remind me of things we did together. When you first are experiencing that loss, like it's just so painful to imagine doing anything that you did with them without them. But as I kind of mentioned before, um, with having the real hard look in the mirror, my biggest fear when I first lost was, oh my gosh, like people aren't going to know my parents, my grandma, like they're not going to know them. And I started to realize, thankfully, and something that brought me a lot of joy and still brings me joy is that I am so intertwined and embedded with my parents, with my grandma, that it's impossible for people to know me and not know them. Whether they know that or not, like, my people live on through me. Um, and so it switched to being like a lot more of a comfort. And so there are things that will happen, like I might say something, or like a quip will come to mind to something somebody said, and I'll be like, oh yeah, like Dadsy would definitely like say that. Oh, grandma, like she would have, so things like that. Really for me, like leaning into things that remind me of those people I have lost. So sometimes that's like walking out in my garden, and now I get to make my husband pull the weeds with me instead of my parents forcing me to pull the weeds.
Mhm.
And I look out and I'm like, oh, I recognize this flower. We had that. Like, I remember one of the first things I did, and this was in 2017. My husband and I had moved to a home, and that was hard because I was moving to a space, moving out of my family home, and did not have parents alive anymore. And I always remember growing up these certain bush like trees we had. And so I decided when we moved in there, when I was looking the next year at like landscaping and what I wanted to plant, I was like, I'm going to add one of those trees. And I called them broccoli trees, which they're actually
Mhm.
verbenium, I think is what it's
Mhm.
actually called. But they kind of look like snowballs. They come in the spring. And now I have one of those, and we've like had to cut it back because it's grown so big. But like that's like a piece of home, a piece of
Yeah.
joy for me to like remember that, I don't even have to do much with this. Yeah, I did the hard work of like putting it in this
Yeah.
space, but other than that, like it grows, it flourishes, and brings me such delight and is such a joy to smell.
Yeah.
So my parents and my grandma were big cooks. My family were chocoholics.
Mhm.
We would purchase a 11-pound bar of chocolate each year.
I didn't
And
even know they made an 11 pound
yes,
bar of chocolate.
Haribo chocolate, and we would make different treats with it. And so one thing we would have often, well, like on special occasions, it was always there within like my mom, dad, sister, and I, we would have this warm chocolate pudding. And
Mm.
so when my sister and I have like a time we're going to be together, and it's just like it's going to be like a late evening,
Mhm.
we will make that. And it's funny because like I'm a daddy's girl and my sister is a mommy's girl.
Mhm.
And we take on their roles. So like my
Yeah.
dad would cut the chocolate, and that's like what I would do. And then my sister would like start the process of putting it all together. And then we still do what our role always was as kids, which was to like help, get the utensils out, mix the egg together, get it all
Mhm.
done. But it's just like a way that we enjoy something that we had joy with when we were with our family. So I definitely think
Yeah.
spending time with my sister, it's always nice in grief when you can be with someone that you can do the grief, the emoting with, like
Mhm.
and I think that's something that's so special about the dinner party and the tables is for some people, like that's their only time to do that.
Mhm. Yep.
Um, and something that I've tried to work on breaking is that is the only place you can do it. Like I talk about my parents, like I think sometimes I'm like, oh, I talk about them like daily. Like I think about, always say that, but like I talk out loud, like to the point
Yeah.
where there are people that are like, oh, like, are you going to see your parents this weekend? Like
Yeah.
they don't know. And so it's just like, I'm glad that people know that and that I'm doing that, because I don't want it to be, they're still very much a part of my life. So
Yeah.
I don't want it to be that they're just, oh, dust them off this time of year and things like that. So definitely as time's gone on, I've gotten more comfortable with doing things that we used to do together and doing things. My parents both would go get massages um monthly, and that, like, to me growing up, I was like, okay, that's like how you've made it, is like you can get a massage monthly. And as a kid, I used to always ask for a massage for Christmas, and like sometimes I would get it, sometimes I wouldn't. But I remember like my first job and like taking a checkbook and like writing out a check for a massage. And I think that that's an important thing too, because when you have, in my family, we were very touchy-feely. And when you have less of those people around, you're not getting as much touch. And so I have built a relationship with my massage therapist, and I go and see her monthly. And we've been going on like this for, I was seeing her inconsistently for years before it was more consistent, but consistently I've been going for 2 years monthly.
That's fantastic. What a
Yeah,
gift to your body.
that time has been really great, and like just, having that relationship. We're friends. Like we get to chat about life, and I love all of the different like small business service providers I go and see. And those definitely bring me a lot of joy. I go and get my nails done. I don't know if you can see
Ooh, I can
that
see.
well,
I like
but
it.
um pick out, they're hand painted. My nail tech artist does an incredible job. She's done Lisa Frank nails for me before.
Mm,
Um, and I go and get my wax done, like all of my
um,
glamour crew.
yeah.
My squad is, like I love catching up with them each month. That
Yeah.
human connection, seeing it is more than just like, oh, I'm going to get this service. It's like, oh, I get to connect with this human
Yeah.
being. And so yeah, it's just things like that. Like I'm really into the routine planned joy. Like,
Yeah.
and I've discovered I do actually, as impulsive as I can be, I like um planning, and so I can like plan my nails,
Yeah.
what I'm going to get done. Um and yeah, it's just been like great to establish those different relationships and invest in each other, which I feel like also honors, my grandma also always loved to have her nails done too. So,
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think what's really sticking with me also as something like to leave with people that are watching this is sometimes it's also not so much about the activity, but the connections you can make to the people that are involved in it, right? And yeah, because it's like, yes, it's about the nails and they're beautiful and you get to plan what's going to be on them, but also to catch up with the girl who does them, right? And to also see the massage therapist and to engage in touch therapy, which is what it is. that there are so many byproducts, right, of these moments of joy that we can find, and that they don't have to be these huge, heavy lifts is also what I want people to gain from this conversation, right? I think sometimes because grief is so overwhelming and all encompassing, we sometimes think that joy needs to be also. And so we have to travel someplace and we need to do this huge thing. And it's like, no, you could go to the grocery store and like plan out your favorite meal and talk to the people in the shop, because maybe that's your only moment of interaction that day, and let that be a joyful one then, right? And also some with some anonymity if you need it, because they don't know all your shit. But
Um,
it's like, so I just appreciate you bringing in that, like, it can be all of these things, and that the people that are attached to them can also be the joy givers. So
yeah.
I just appreciate that. And you reminding me and reminding people listening and watching, and for sharing your dad and your mom and your grandma with us. I I really enjoy these conversations. I like to hear how we're all walking through this.
Yeah.
Um, and you planted a few seeds in my own head. So I'm
I
grateful
definitely
for that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you, creating this space. And I think for me, and life gets so busy,
Yeah.
sometimes with if you can feel like you're just like dragging through the mud trying to make it to the next day.
Yeah.
And it's hard. Like there every year is different, every grief, every loss is different. Within my own, like all three of mine have been different
Yeah.
experiences. And so I think, planning like ways that you're going to care for yourself, that you're going to show yourself that love, doing something you enjoy, even if it's like, I'm a big, promoter of therapy,
Mhm.
a future social worker. And, I have my therapist that I go to, and
Mhm.
creating those spaces, if you're not able to have a space regularly that you can talk about your grief, you know, getting in a routine of that, planning that, um, joining the dinner party, there's so many different opportunities that the dinner party has. I have two members in my current table that have buddies, and they're like,
Mhm.
I feel like I was on a dating show and they found me my soulmate, and I'm like, that's incredible. So I think that like the dinner party, grieving in community, I think is how we're supposed to do it.
Yep.
That's not how society seems to work anymore. And I'm trying to push against that
Yeah.
because everybody experiences loss,
Yeah.
and we're all going to. And it can't just be this thing of us throwing stuff into the hole and being like,
Yeah.
best of luck to you. Like we have to allow the space to be uncomfortable. It's not fair to
Mhm.
just show up for people when times are good. You
Yeah.
know, it's
You're
even
gonna have to put the ladder in the hole and get
right.
yourself down there.
And you don't even have to say anything. Sometimes just being there and letting a person talk, or watching those home videos, or going
Yeah.
with them to get their nails done. Like
No.
whatever it might be, like hold space for people. Put your people's dates, if you have loved ones that have experienced a loss, like put their anniversaries in your phone. Say
Yeah.
something. Like they're not forgetting. You're not bringing it up and reminding them. Like it's always on your mind. And honestly, at this point, the people that say stuff to me on those anniversaries, they provide me some joy
Yeah.
because they
They
hold
do.
that space and they remember.
And on that note, thank you, Sara. I hope everyone takes something from the grievers who are watching to the people who aren't grievers but are hoping to learn about how to show up for grievers. I hope everyone takes something from this conversation. I really appreciate it. I know that our community is going to find light in your words and hopefully their own wholemate within our community. Thank you to everyone who's listening and watching. Again, this is Meet and Grief, what's bringing you joy right now. And please keep your eyes and ears open for the rest of our conversations coming up. Have a gentle day, y'all.